And for those who enjoy this channel and would love to support us financially, please feel free to hit that donate link. We'd greatly appreciate it. God bless.
Welcome back. I'm Scott Gillis. This is my good friend, Dr. Robert Carter. How you doing, Rob?
Doing great, Scott.
Good. Well, you and I have talked about this topic for a few years now, haven't we?
Oh, yeah, at least 3 or 4.
And genetic modification is something that's in the news recently.
In huge ways, yeah.
And when I think back, just 50 years ago, we landed on the moon.
Yeah.
Incredible accomplishment. You know, in the time of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, those late 1800s and 1900s, an advancement like that was just a dream.
It's just science fiction.
No, but we're never going to be able to do that.
It's not true,
right?
yeah.
Right? But now we live in a world where it's absolutely accepted and true.
Yeah.
And you know, genetic modification is something that isn't new, right? It's been going around for
decades,
a little while,
yeah.
right? But this idea of human genetic modification, where we can actually change people in essence, there's some pretty incredible recent news about that, right?
It's no longer science fiction.
Right.
And it's kind of scary.
Yeah. So a few years ago, I came and I heard some information about something called CRISPR, right? In fact, just a few months ago, I was in a church and I was coming right before a time when I was doing a question and answer time. And I had I think about a 16-year-old young lady come up to me and she said, "What's your opinion about CRISPR?" And I just looked at her baffled. I said, "You're 16 years old. How do you know what CRISPR is?" And she said, well, someone from the college had come into her high school class and told her about it. And so I actually polled the people that were at that talk. There were over 100 people there. And I said, hey, I'm just interested. A young lady told me she knows what CRISPR is. How many people know what CRISPR is? And you know what? Only her hand went up. Out of over 100 people.
10 years from now, that will no longer be true.
Well, I even told them, I said, you know what? I said, it'll be in the news maybe in 3 years. You'll know what it is. But it turns out I was wrong. In a way, I was wrong, right?
In many ways, you're wrong.
Yeah, because recently, Netflix,
the
big media giant, they made a series that was talking about CRISPR.
Yes, unnatural selection.
Yeah.
Which, for the listening audience, we can't necessarily recommend because of the bad language.
Of course.
And the subject material is hard for some people.
But you and I wrote an article.
We did?
On creation.com about, and I think if you did a search for unnatural selection, you could find that article. And we talk about the discoveries that were made. But we have to all admit, it's shocking, isn't it?
It is absolutely shocking. How much of that show is real or not, you and I couldn't tell.
Yeah.
But there's nothing they presented that isn't theoretically possible.
Right.
And that's scary.
So what were some of the things in general that you got out of that series regarding CRISPR? Or maybe let me ask you this.
Okay.
What is CRISPR? What is that? I guess it stands for something, right? It's an acronym?
It's an acronym for a really long, complicated scientific phrase. So we'll just call it CRISPR.
Right. But tell me, what, in general, can you give me an idea of what CRISPR is?
Back in the 80s,
somebody
realized that bacteria have an immune system of sorts.
Yeah.
When they're exposed to like viral DNA, they can grab a piece of that viral DNA, cut their genome, and stick the piece of virus in there.
You mean the bacteria can do that?
Yeah, the bacteria can do that.
All right.
So they can keep like a library of DNA that they've been exposed to. Well, decades later, 2003-ish, a woman named Jennifer Doudna and a couple other people around the world about the same time had this revelation that, well, that protein, that CRISPR thing, has an RNA, and the RNA is what sticks on the DNA. Well, what happens if you change the RNA? You can change where it sticks.
That's a pretty amazing thought to come up with that idea.
Amazing.
What does it mean?
It means that we can now target any place in any genome we like and stick anything we like at that position.
And this is a big change, am I right? Because, you know, for instance, John Sanford, you work with him regularly.
Yeah.
He's spoken at our conferences and he's written some resources that we produce. You work with him and he's the inventor of the gene gun, right?
Yeah. I remember before I met him in graduate school, we used to joke, man, if we only had $3 million, we could buy one of the gene guns and making our fluorescent fish would be so much easier.
Right, right.
But I had no idea I was going to work with this man in the future.
That's right.
But his invention led to the first generation of genetically modified crops.
Yeah, yeah, in order to take plants and modify those. But this is kind of like a new phase. It's a completely important technology that's going to really change the world. Am I overstating that?
You're not understating that. It's going to change the world.
Yeah.
The world's already changing.
Yeah.
And the newer versions of this CRISPR-like technologies are more accurate and faster.
All right. So according to the research, according to Netflix series, what are some of the things that they're able to do with this new technology?
Well, we're not certain how much the Netflix series is true.
Right.
But at least the things they present are theoretically possible.
Yeah.
So they had one person, a little boy, where they literally opened up his eye, peeled back his retina, added new genes, and put his retina back again.
Yeah, I remember that.
He was going blind, and at the end of the series, he's driving around a racetrack in the go-kart.
Yeah.
Whoa. But what we do know, things that have happened, just 3 years after CRISPR was announced, 2 girls were born in China that had genetic modifications done on them, which opens up a massive Pandora's box of moral and ethical problems.
It was kind of shocking news, wasn't it?
It was shocking because all the bioethicists and all the geneticists in the world had basically said, don't do anything that can be inherited. If you want to experiment on an adult, that's one thing, but don't experiment on what's called the germ line, the cells that are passed from one generation to the next.
So what do you mean by germ line?
There's a difference between if I change my skin cells.
Yeah.
That can't be inherited.
Okay.
But if I do something to my genome throughout my entire body that can be inherited in the next generation,
passed on.
I might be affecting the next generation. I might be doing it negatively.
And maybe generations after that.
Yeah. And this CRISPR technology specifically, it's not very clean. Yeah, you can make modification, but it makes lots of mistakes. And sometimes when you cut the double-stranded DNA, you might lose the other strand. And so it might stick somewhere else, and all of a sudden you have a massive change, and it's not well controlled.
Right.
But also, what right do we have to experiment on embryos and babies?
Rob, you and I, we do carpentry. We enjoy doing millwork and carpentry. We've done some together. And, I think of that standard tool, the hammer, right? It can be used to build some wonderful, functional, and beautiful things, but hammer can also be used to damage and destroy things, right?
Yeah, it can be very dangerous to hold a hammer in your hand.
And with any technology, including this one, there can be used for good,
but even when it's
for bad.
But even when it's used for good, though, there are still open moral questions.
Right.
Like, how many embryos had to be experimented on before we found out how to do this thing?
Exactly.
That's a tough question.
Right.
And one of the other things that's coming up now is, why not genetically modify a human baby to make it better?
Right.
Less sick, superior, smarter, faster. I mean, those genes are already in the population. You're not doing anything different. You're just giving your kid a little boost.
Right.
But what happens if that child doesn't develop properly? What's going to happen in the doctor's office? Oh, your kid's, has X, Y, or Z. I strongly suspect there'll be a selective abortion happening here.
So it has some big implications that
Huge
Christians in
implications.
particular, we need to be aware of that. We need to be equipped with information, right?
Yes.
So if you want to know more about this topic of genetics, and in particular, the morality that goes along with it, go to our website, creation.com. We have a section on genetics, a section on morality. You can look up the article that Rob and I wrote. Just do a search for the words unnatural selection, and you can read more about that.
So it begins.
Your lives will never be the same. Creationist Bill Morgan. You've seen him debate before. He's taken on the likes of T-Jump, Gutsick Gibbon, Snake Was Right, Emotionally Stunted Emoticon. Bill Morgan is taking on Jordan from Reasons to Doubt podcast. He's taken on Dr. Kent Hovind himself. He's also taken on Standing for Truth and Raw Matt. This Friday will be unforgettable because they are debating creation versus evolution. Be there.